the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are setting our sights on what is probably Africa's largest and most contentious infrastructure project, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD, as you'll hear it called.
Yeah. And this thing, it isn't just an engineering marvel, it's a full-blown geopolitical flashpoint. It has totally redefined water politics in the Nile Basin.
And it's a huge topic. To really get it, you have to look at the engineering, sure, but also the economic models, the international law.
It's all of that, all focused on this single kind of revolutionary structure.
And we have to start right at the source. I mean, literally, you can't talk about the Nile without first talking about the Blue Nile, which, originates in the Ethiopian highlands.
That's the key. That one river contributes over 85% of the total flow to the main Nile.
And critically, nearly 100% of the sediment.
Exactly. That basic hydrology establishes Ethiopia as the undisputed water tower for the entire region. And that is why this dam is fundamentally about power and about development rights.
So our mission today is to really analyze how the GERD represents this. This profound rebalancing of power in the Nile Basin. We're watching a really messy transition, moving from a colonial-era framework for water
to a modern one, or at least the ideal of a modern one, equitable utilization.
So we'll map that out for you. First, we'll get into the colonial legacy that really fueled this whole conflict.
Then the dam itself, the monumental scale, the technical challenges.
And finally, we'll look at the future. What does cooperation, or maybe the lack of it, actually look like from here on out? Okay, let's unpack this. How did a country like Ethiopia, which provides almost all the water, end up completely excluded from using its own resource for so long?
It's a story rooted entirely in colonial control, what academics call hydrohegemony.
And it started with these old agreements, right?
Yes, the initial instruments of exclusion were agreements signed when Ethiopia was, completely sidelined. You have the 1929 Nile Waters Agreement that was between Great Britain, acting for its colonies, and Egypt.
And that gave Egypt, what, a historical right to the water?
A historical right, and here's the real kicker, veto power over any upstream projects.
Veto power. So nothing could be built without their say-so.
Nothing. And then, even after independence, the downstream states, they just solidified that control.
So that brings us to the 1959 agreement.
That's the one, the 1959 bilateral agreement. This is between an independent Egypt and an independent Sudan. And they allocated the entire annual flow of the Nile between just the two of them.
The entire flow.
The whole thing, leaving precisely zero for Ethiopia and the other upstream states. It's like they cut up a pizza that wasn't entirely theirs to begin with.
So that's the root of the conflict we see today. You have Egypt and Sudan arguing for established rights.
And Ethiopia demanding equitable rights. That's the fundamental clash.
But the idea of damming the Blue Nile, that wasn't new in 2011. The blueprint was already there, wasn't it?
Oh, it was. Way back in the late 50s and 60s, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation did these extensive studies for Ethiopia. They identified 26 potential dam sites.
Including the GERD location.
Including the exact spot for the GERD, yeah. They called it the border dam back then. So the knowledge, the plan, it was all there for decades.
So why did it just sit on a shelf for 40 years?
Well, it was a mix of things, a lot of internal instability, civil wars, regime changes, but also intense external diplomatic pressure.
From Egypt?
Specifically from Egypt.
Yeah.
And that pressure was incredibly effective. It blocked Ethiopia from getting any international funding, the World Bank, the IMF.
Right.
You can't build a dam this big without billions, and they just couldn't get it.
Which makes the timing of the 2011 announcement, it was a brilliant diplomatic move.
Strategic genius. They started the project in total secrecy. They called it Project X.
Right.
And then the big public reveal in March 2011 happened to coincide exactly with the chaos of the Arab Spring. Egypt was just completely preoccupied with its own revolution. They couldn't mount the kind of forceful response they might have before.
And they solved that financing blockade with this incredible self-funding model.
It's amazing, really. It wasn't like traditional bond selling. It was more like a mass national mobilization. They funded it through selling bonds to ordinary citizens, through salary deductions for civil servants.
And the diaspora.
A huge amount of support from the global Ethiopian diaspora. They didn't just build a dam, they rebranded it as a symbol of national renewal. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The name says it all.
So that brings us from, the politics and the history to the concrete and steel. Let's talk about the sheer scale here.
It's massive. The reservoir can hold 74 billion cubic meters of water. That's BCM.
74. And just for context, The Blue Nile's entire average annual flow is about 50 BCM.
Exactly. So the reservoir can hold more than a full year's worth of the river's flow.
Yeah.
And that capacity is what downstream countries, especially Egypt, are so worried about.
And this physical reality, it totally changed the regional dynamics. What I find fascinating is how Sudan's position shifted.
Yeah. While Egypt was fighting Ethiopia tooth and nail, Sudan started doing the math and realized the dam actually offered them some huge benefits.
So what was in it for them?
A few big things. First, vastly improved flood control. Second, access to cheap, stable electricity. And third, and this is a big one, reduced sedimentation.
So the GERD acts like a giant sediment trap.
It does. Which means Sudan's own dams, like Meroe, will last for decades longer because they won't be filling up with silt.
Okay, so the heart of the dispute now, though, it's the filling plan. You have to get that 74 BCM of water in there somehow.
Absolutely. And the proposals were miles apart. Ethiopia wanted to fill it in about 5 to 7 years, to start generating power quickly and get a return on that massive investment.
And Egypt's demand.
Egypt wanted 12 years, maybe more. Plus, they wanted specific guarantees for minimum water releases during the filling because they were terrified of a crippling drop in their own reservoir, Lake Nasser.
And this isn't just about water levels, it's about risk. People have been running complex computer models on the worst-case scenario.
Right. The dreaded hypothetical. The biggest threat is the GERD filling happening at the same time as a multi-year severe drought.
And those models show.
They show a severe water shortfall reaching the Aswan High Dam, a true threat to Egypt's main water supply and its biggest hydropower facility. That's the risk everyone is trying to manage.
We also hear a lot about water loss from evaporation. Is that a major concern with a reservoir this big?
It's a legitimate question, but there's a key technical point here. The GERD is at a much higher elevation and in a cooler climate than the Aswan High Dam.
Okay.
So Lake Nasser, which is Aswan's reservoir, actually has a significantly higher evaporation rate. The GERD is, in that sense, more water efficient.
So with all this technical data, why did the legal negotiations just fall apart?
Ambiguity, really. They had a nice handshake moment back in 2015 with something called the Declaration of Principles, the DOP.
And it laid out some core ideas.
It did. Cooperation and the two big legal principles we mentioned, not causing significant harm, or NHC, and equitable and reasonable utilization, ERU.
Let's just define those again quickly.
Yeah.
So ERU is Ethiopia's argument. We had a right to build.
Our right to develop our resources, yeah. That's backed by international water law.
And NHC is Egypt's argument. Don't reduce our historical flow.
Any quantifiable reduction, they argue, is existential harm. The problem is, the DINA-P was just a handshake. It gave zero guidance on what significant harm actually means in numbers. There's no accepted quantitative definition.
So, with the negotiations stalled, Ethiopia just went ahead and started filling it.
They adopted the strategy of the fait accompli, the unilateral fillings from 2020 to 2023.
A very calculated risk.
A very calculated risk. They did it during heavy rain seasons to minimize the immediate impact downstream, and by doing so, they made the dam a physical, undeniable, operational reality.
And Egypt took the case to the UN Security Council, right? Multiple times.
They did, framing it as a threat to regional peace. But the UNSC consistently just kicked it back to the African Union.
Saying this needs an African solution to African problems.
Exactly. And that was a huge diplomatic shift. It forced everyone back to the table, but now on Ethiopia's terms, because the dam was already full and working.
So that brings us to today, the new reality.
The new reality is that the debate has shifted entirely. It's no longer about whether to fill the dam. It's about defining the rules of sustained operation, the RUSO.
And the single biggest sticking point in those rules is what?
Drought mitigation. It all comes down to the drought protocols. This means defining exactly how the GERD and the Aswan High Dam will coordinate water releases during a multi-year drought.
A coordinated drawdown.
That's the concept. It means treating GERD and Aswan like two giant interconnected valves in the same plumbing system.
So if Aswan gets dangerously low, GERD has to release more water to compensate.
That's the idea. The problem, though, is that Ethiopia has a very practical constraint. They have to keep a minimum water level in their own reservoir to keep the turbines spinning.
For power generation.
For power generation. If the water drops below that, the dam loses its whole economic purpose. So that limits how much they can really help Aswan in a crisis.
And this whole situation is forcing massive adaptation downstream. The certainty of the Nile's flow is just gone.
Right. We're watching a forced shift from managing water supply to managing water demand.
So in Egypt, you're seeing huge investments in
desalination projects, lining canals to reduce leakage, major changes in agriculture. They're cutting back on high-water crops like rice. It's expensive, but it's necessary. The era of unilateral control over the Nile is over.
But the sources also point to a potential positive outcome, this water-energy-food nexus.
It's the grand bargain, potentially.
Okay.
Ethiopia sells cheap, reliable electricity through the Eastern Africa power pool. In exchange for Egypt and Sudan buying that power, maybe Ethiopia guarantees a certain baseline water release.
So it turns a zero-sum water fight into a positive-sum economic trade.
That's the vision.
But you have to layer the uncertainty of climate change over all of this.
And that makes everything 10 times harder. The climate models for the Ethiopian highlands are all over the place. Some predict more rainfall, which would be great, but others predict more variability.
Meaning more extreme weather.
Exactly. More intense floods and more frequent severe droughts. That uncertainty makes it incredibly difficult to agree on fixed operating rules.
So, to sort of pull this all together, the era of colonial water allocation is, without a doubt, over. The dam is a reality. It's a symbol of development for Ethiopia.
But it's still a genuine existential concern for downstream nations. The challenge now isn't about stopping the project, it's about sharing the risk.
And the only sustainable future here depends on a new, legally binding, technically sophisticated agreement.
It has to be based on coordinated operation to manage this shared, finite resource in an age of total climate uncertainty.
Which leads us to the final thought we want to leave you with. Given this high potential for climate variability, more intense floods and droughts, is the GERD, which is this massive flow regulator, ultimately an asset that requires cooperation?
Or is it a liability that just makes the diplomatic tension worse? The dam isn't the end of the Nile's history. It's really the beginning of its first truly shared and very contentious future.